What's up, NFL draft fans? It's that time of year. We've got a few weeks left. A couple? Is it a couple? Is it 3? I don't know, but it's not that many. And I am really, really excited. And we here at SumerSports are even more excited today than we were a couple of days ago because Sammy B, we have our draft guide out. I'm Lindsay Rhodes. This is Sam Bruckhouse, who is with me. Sam Bruckhouse, who I learned last night, already knew is smarter than a fifth grader. I am not. I literally texted him during the national championship game last night, questions about my fifth grade son's math homework. Because this girl right here works for a data company and doesn't know how to multiply fractions. Sammy was like, I'll let you know after one shining moment. I was like, I'm the a-hole who didn't even have the game on because I have so many other things like family related going on. So anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting that and thank you for your help.
So that's a two-part story. Number one is my parents would always let me stay up late when I was like very young. I'm talking like barely can remember it, but my mom just like tells the story over and over again to watch One Shining Moment. And without a doubt, as soon as Luther Vandross starts singing, my mom starts crying immediately.
Yes. Oh, I like your mom. Your mom and I are same.
Yeah.
Every time.
And so as a result, I
now
have to watch it every single year. And so, people have to go to work. It's the East Coast. It started at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm like screaming at people that I'm watching with, sit down. We have to wait until One Shining Moment comes on.
For sure.
Exactly.
But the thing is, you do have to wait. Like but also there's not that much editing from the end of the game that goes into it. So I'm always like, can we get this on a little bit quicker? But obviously they're trying to hold the viewer for as long as possible, knowing that people like you and me are waiting for One Shining Moment.
Right.
Do you think now that you are an adult that there's a cheesiness to it? Because I still don't. I see it. I see the cheesiness to it, but it gets me.
Well, it's the most succinct storytelling element probably in sports of basically a month of games, right? There's 64 teams, there's however many games. And this year wasn't the most like crazy. It was fun seeing, my Lake Charles, Louisiana Magnies Cowboys on there. But it's just like, it's a great storytelling device in a very quick, reproducible format. I was laughing because I know you didn't catch a ton of the game, Lindsay, but like at the end of the game, it basically ended with a guy pulling up for a shot and he thought it was going to get blocked. And so he dropped the ball and just kind of stood there and then the clock ran out. And I'm like, there's always the scene where they find a kid crying and it's like in the middle of One Shining Moment of the kid crying. And I'm like, that really sucks that happened 10 minutes ago. And it's going to immediately get edited of him just like dropping the ball and then dropping to the floor and like immediately being like, what did I do? And so it's, it's the highs and the lows of sports. I like it. I don't find it cheesy at all.
Yeah. I acknowledge the cheesiness, but I still love it. It's kind of like this is, I think, a little bit before your time, but like the Academy Award conversation surrounding Crash winning, when Crash won and people were like, it's so manipulative. And so therefore it's not as valid as an art form. And I was like, I mean, it manipulated the hell out of me. I was bawling the whole time and I was there for the process. So like, I don't care, I guess. Like if it got me where I wanted to go, like emotionally, then I don't know. Sometimes that is White Lotus. Also, we need to let the people know about our friend T. Okay, Thomas Dimitrov, who we do a radio show with on Sirius on Fridays. We were doing the radio show, and as we're wrapping up, seconds to go, I'm saying goodbye. I'm teasing the draft guide, which again, we will talk about, just came out yesterday. And then as we are essentially off air, but Thomas doesn't know this yet, he goes, White Lotus, out of nowhere. Like, Buddy was so excited for the season finale. I kind of want to hit him up, but I know he's really busy to get his thoughts on it.
I do not watch White Lotus.
What, Sam?
No. So number one, I don't watch a lot of TV at all outside of sports. But the ones that I do,
that's how you know how to multiply fractions. And this dummy is just
okay. Wait. I forgot part 2 of that story. So part 2 of that story is on the assignment that you sent me. It said, show your work on paper. And I come from a family that is like, my mom was a teacher, my aunt
Teacher.
was a teacher, my
Yeah.
my grandma was a teacher, my cousins are all like like male cousins are all coaches and thus teachers as well, public school. My uncle was the superintendent of public schools, and so it's just like every human being that can be a teacher is a teacher. And so I know like Common Core, which I don't even know is a thing anymore. Like it was a big thing. Anyway, like Common Core, and like it changed the way, and you have to do this and that and third. Didn't know if you could use a calculator. And I get really nervous when I have to do actual math. I've never been really good at it, but I'm very good at like computers and like the logic and remembering formulas and stuff like that. But I can't actually do good math, like fast facts or whatever. Mental
Isn't
math,
that
I'm
all
absolutely
formulas?
terrible at.
So if you can remember the formulas, they don't understand.
That's a
How come
great
you can't
question
do
that
them?
I don't have a good answer to. Honestly, great point. I don't know.
No
So
judgment
anyway,
here. I don't know any of it.
I have like 5 pages of notes right here that are all just like, oh, I messed up, careless mistake, careless mistake, careless mistake. But it all ends up being the same exact thing, which was right. So that was part 2 of the
Wait,
story that I
were
actually
all
took
of
me a
those
second.
pieces of paper your attempt to do the 5th grade math problem in a show your work form, or is that something different?
It was more just like I didn't add or subtract correctly. But yes.
Time out. You are a professional data scientist,
That's
and you
why
use that much paper to show your work on my son's math problem. And now I'm starting to think like maybe I feel less stupid for not being able to help him.
uh the
No, I'm
whole
still stupid.
reason that
Okay.
I no, the whole reason I got into computers was so that I just tell the computer what math to do, which I like to think I'm okay at, but the actual doing of said math ends up with me and like just making one small error, not knowing what 18 minus 9 or 18 divided by 9 is, and then I screw up. So,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
let the
I was
computers do
I was lost. And you're not the only
it.
person I reached out to. I reached out to like a friend text thread. One of the people is like literally a rocket scientist. Like there's like people weighing in on this. And I still at the end of the day was like, ask your teacher and tell her you don't understand this. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Anywho, that's 5th grade math for you. Good times. Back to White Lotus. You did
Right.
not watch, so I can't have this conversation with you, and I'm a little bit disappointed. You're letting me down here. We can't have any kind of pop culture. Did
Yeah.
you have you like how have you managed to stay out of that whole mix? It's been everywhere this season.
Um, I don't know. The algorithms are good, I guess.
Oh,
I've
my
like seen all
algorithms
the
are
I've seen all the memes. I don't really get them. I love Amy Lou. What's her name? She's in a Netflix series that's more like, it's not really kiddie, but it's like it was young. It was like YA fiction basically, or whatever on Netflix. That she was great. But yeah, like I probably need to watch more television. I like television series.
such
I like watching movies, so I'll go to the movies and then I watch a lot of sports, and it feels like it hasn't stopped because of the draft. So I've basically gone season draft and then it's the playoffs. So the playoffs for NBA, that is, so, which is like all 3 of my favorite times of the year, and then the summer when it's nice outside. So
this is like this is a good time of year for you. A lot of
yeah,
basketball, NFL draft. We put out our draft guide yesterday. It's
exciting.
so cool, you guys. So, first of all, want to highlight with regards to our draft guide, which you can find at SumerSports.com. It's not a file that you have to download and it's going to take up a ton of space on your computer. It's a dynamic like website that will constantly be updated as we find new information, add
Hmm.
it to the page. That's a cool feature. It's mobile friendly. Most importantly, it's free because a
Right.
lot of this advanced data, as I say all the time here on this show, is behind paywalls. And so I think it's really cool that you can find some of the usage data, scheme specific stuff, advanced stat percentile against the, in comparison to other college football players. All of that stuff is on the draft guide. So I highly recommend if you are a draft nerd at all or a hardcore fan and you know exactly what type of scheme specific person your team is going to be looking for in a later round. Like sometimes the draft guide and the type of information that we have there, I think will be particularly helpful for you. What's your favorite part of the guide?
I think my favorite part of the guide by far, just nerd wise, is the completion percentage over expected maps, because it asks so many it brings up so many questions. So, for example, a guy like Will Howard, who I know was on Barstool's John Gruden's show, obviously I go immediately check out Will Howard's completion percentage over expected map, and he's like a green machine. Like it's green and blue everywhere, which for the record, everyone, that means it's like good or elite. He's basically over the 70th percentile.
Excellent is blue.
Right.
Good is green. That's the next
Right.
level.
Right. And so he has green and blue everywhere. And we've talked about it many times how we love to investigate these guys and investigate these prospects and investigate what's actually going on the field. And so it's so interesting because he's green all over the place for last year, particularly deep balls. And then when he's talking to Gruden, talking about how like, oh yeah, go as green all the time when number 4 is out there, Jeremiah Smith, who could be the number 1 pick next year. It's like, oh, so this dude knows that he's throwing to really good receivers and is just letting it fly. How much credit thus goes to the receivers? Maybe that's why he's more down the board. Maybe that's why this looks the same rather than a Shedeur Sanders or a Cam Ward, for example, who was not throwing to Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, who are both, certified first or second round guys. Jeremiah Smith being one of the top prospects of all time, probably. And so I love that because it's something that does not really exist anywhere else. And then the second part that I want to highlight is if you love college football, this is the guide for you because these statistics do not exist anywhere else on the internet for free, for pay, for anything. And so what we put together here, and a lot of hard work has gone in from our data engineers, our product people, our front end engineers, just like an excellent velocity, excellent amount of work from them, has been to build something that's completely new and free. So if you're an SMU fan, you can go check out your guys who are in the draft. I was looking at my Tulane guys, Notre Dame. I mean, you name it. If there's a guy in the top 50, 150, and it's going to be able to expand because, like you said, Lindsay, it's an app and it's not just a downloadable PDF. Mm-hmm. Then you can go ahead and send us a tweet. Say there's a guy that you want to see. Maybe we'll end up putting him in right before the draft. And all of that is so good for college football fans in a way that, people love looking at the NFL. The NFL is a little bit more open with their data just because it's a single league. And college football is kind of all over the place. And we're working hard to bring it together. And this is our first foray into that. So excellent day to be a college football fan now that the draft guide is out.
By the way, Daniel, I'm seeing your comment. I know that you want to know who Dallas drafts at 12. We'll get to that in a little bit. Sorry. But thank you for being here. One of the things about the completion percentage over expected by zone that jumped out to me was how high some of the numbers are.
Right.
Like we're used to seeing completion percentage over expected is like 7% or something like that. And that's like, I want to say that's Jalen Hurts led the league in completion percentage over expected last year. And the number was 7. So you're looking at zones and it's all over, like Will Howard, you brought up. So deep middle, 58.7, right? But deep right, minus 2.3. So it's a really interesting visual. I mean, you're going to see the greens, blue, like all of the different, red. So you kind of get an idea of like which zones. You could just look at it like that without even looking at the numbers. And by the way, there's a key that kind of tells you what the number, the colors mean from a percentile standpoint. But I think it's really interesting that the percentages are so dramatically different, even within deep, right?
Right. And that goes back to the investigation part of how often is this player throwing these passes? For Will Howard, he was only throwing in between the hashes when there was a big post breaking off and he knew that he could hit Egbuka or Jeremiah Smith, dead to rights over the middle and fry someone for a touchdown. I think he had like minimal attempts on that. And there are minimal attempts on deep balls generally. And so the takeaway that I want people to get is to see some of these big numbers and think to themselves, okay, let's take it to the film or let's take it to some of these other stats that we have in here and figure out why these numbers are so big. Is there a skill that was underutilized from this player? And that's why that number is so big. And we want to test out at the next level if he can continue doing that with volume. Is this just a sheer volume stat? Like, for example, Shedeur Sanders threw a metric ton of screen passes. So his completion percentage over expected doesn't look great as compared to some of the other players on the passes behind the line of scrimmage. However, his is stabilized to the maximum, to where other teams just don't even really throw screens a whole bunch. It's not really a part of their offense. They rely on their run game more in short yardage situations and situations like that. And so that investigation bit, the kind of shining light in the darkness about some of these things of volume. Does he have the volume? Does he not have the volume? Should he have the volume? Should he not have the volume? Is something that evaluators are doing to project these guys to the pros anyway. And so it's exciting to have those in numbers in a way that we haven't at all before at the college level.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I like about I like all of the data that is hard to find. Yeah, I'm a dork, so I really like it being consolidated in one place. I think in a lot of ways this feels like, I don't know that this is the right phrase for it, but I'm assuming that you are a hardcore draft person if you're using our guide. I think that that's for the most part who this is aimed at. I feel like it's a really nice complementary draft guide in terms of like there are other draft guides out there that you're going to find that are like the beast is going to come out at some point this week,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's going to have a lot of like write up and evaluation and like words, right? And background and lots of stuff like that. This guide has none of that. It's specific. I mean, it has some of that, but like that's not what we're going for. We're
Right.
specifically trying to add data that you can't find in other places. And so I feel like you could open up one of those draft guides and then also have this one, and it'll paint different pictures or complementary pictures, I guess I would say. Yeah, really, really excited about this. Excited about the badges. If
Mm-hmm.
those of you are familiar with Madden and stuff like that, all of you guys are familiar with Madden, but we've come up with different badges for people who are particularly good in certain areas. You mentioned Shadori has 5 badges. That means that he ranks in the top 25 in various categories according to our SumerSports data. Cam, it has 6 of those and has been in the news this week. We have some news that we need to kind of react to since we last talked. And one of them points to him, some reports that point to him being the number 1 pick. I know a lot of people have sort of assumed that he probably would be, but now that we have news that the Titans have canceled a private workout with Shador Sanders, then it kind of points to that probably happening. Not just because they're not willing to look at him. But if you weren't going to take Cam and you were going to take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter at number 1, then you would probably still want to see Shador Sanders in case he falls and you want to
Mm-hmm.
trade back up and get him. So that's why this news indicates that they're going to take Cam specifically and not just that they're not going to take Shador at number 1. So do you think that it's a fair assumption that that's probably what that means?
I would think so at this point. I think that the process that they probably have been going through has been, we like Cam Ward, we like some of these other guys. How much do we like the other quarterbacks, and how little is that marginal? Probably personally, like I'd love to dig deeper and figure out who canceled the actual interview or private workout or what the reasoning was, because if I'm the Titans, I'm still probably trying to explore the trade route just because historically it's been proven to work. And continue down that route just as long as I can. Like, for example, I remember months and months ago, we were talking about the 49ers and how it felt like they were just going to string Brandon Ayuk out like they did with Nick Bosa, just because it didn't really benefit them to pay them if they were just going to extend them right before the season anyway, especially given they were certified locks to play and so forth and so on. I feel like it's kind of like that for the Titans and the Browns with regards to the trade market. But that being said, if you are locked in on a quarterback, on the top consensus big board quarterback, on a team that doesn't necessarily have a quarterback other than Will Levis, if you still believe in him, it makes the most sense to just go ahead, take, the analytically, positionally value correct take of just going ahead and taking Cam Ward. And I think they put in the pieces to move forward with that plan, it seems like now.
I agree. And I think a lot of smart draft people have come to the same conclusions that this probably points to Cam Ward at number 1. And then almost immediately there were reports about the Browns. And I think, I mean, once you think, okay, Cam Ward, then you turn to number 2, and number 2, I think, becomes fascinating because all 3 options at that spot, I think, are I can understand them, right? Like, I certainly have favorites among the 3 options, but, like, putting Carter on the same line as Myles Garrett and just, like, absolutely blowing up backfields is valuable.
Right.
Putting Travis Hunter in the defensive backfield or using him as a wide receiver, and I think they definitely need help in their wide receiver group, or having him do both. That's certainly valuable, and then, obviously, you could talk yourself into Shedeur Sanders because you need a quarterback. You don't, I mean, Kenny Pickett's the quarterback there right now. So that makes sense also. There have been reports by Adam Schefter that it's looking like Travis Hunter. I think he's under the impression that Travis Hunter is going to be the Browns pick. And so I ask you the same question I did about the Titans. Does that make sense to you? And do you think that, are you willing to believe that report?
So the Browns are in such an interesting position as a team who has been ranked year over year by ESPN as the most analytically driven NFL team in the league. I think they're inclined to try to trade back from this position. Uh, I think that's their initial inclination, no matter what. Um, and I think also that they probably also believe that they have a better analytical charting trait operation than anyone else in the league, and thus separately would be more equipped to make a pick at 2 than anyone else. And so it's an interesting dichotomy. And so I've been trying to like look around at what's going on. 2 top mock draft writers, I guess is the correct word, mock draft insiders, I suppose, analysts have such a varying degree of where they go in here. You look at Shedeur Sanders. Some people, Matthew Friedman from Fantasy Life, who has been in the top 4 many times in terms of accuracy, has Shedeur going 2. Charlie Campbell from Walter Football, who has also been in the top 5 of accuracy many, many times, has him going 33. That's a wide gap of what the Browns are actually going to do. And so it brings me to a feeling of that this is no longer a positional value bet for the Browns. It's a draft model bet for the Browns. Do they think that a quarterback that they like, whether that's Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, whoever, Jackson Dart, do they think that that player will be available either at the back half of the first round if they want to lock in the 5th year option, or at 33?
Yeah.
That is now the bet that they're making,
Yeah.
because if you think that is correct,
or also, do they not see also in terms of their board, do they not see much difference between Shedeur and whoever else might still be available in that position? That's also on the
Right.
table, but I think it all kind of goes together.
Well, here's where that gets sticky, though, is because the research has indicated that if you go by the consensus big board, typically you're going to end up doing better than any single one general manager, so forth and so on. That ends up extrapolating to big board, so forth and so on. Like the turtles all the way down to a certain degree. And so at some point in a draft model, you're going to have to regress, or at least keep in those market tools at the positional level. Right now, if you look at the Athletics consensus big board, which is a better sense of value, there's a big gap between Cam Ward and between Shedeur Sanders. There's an even bigger gap between QB2 Shedeur Sanders and QB3 Jackson Dart, who I think is like some in the 50s. And so, like, that's still a massive gap, if I'm not mistaken. And as a result, it's hard to not have Shedeur Sanders at QB2. Regardless, there is still the bet of, okay, well, I'm seeing insiders see that he may go 2, and maybe I have this information. And so at what probability do I think he's going to be open at each pick? I think right now the consensus pick is him at 9 to the Saints, if I'm not mistaken. Like, that's what a lot of people think is going to happen. Who knows if that may happen,
Oh.
but I think the bet the Browns are making is no longer what I thought it was 2 to 3 weeks ago. And it's very similar with the Giants as well, of, okay, I have to hit positional value in a place where demand is very high. And it's now, okay, I want to hit that positional value, but how can I structure what I'm doing based on what I understand post free agency to get all of that at cost? And so it's a much trickier bet because it only takes one team, as everyone likes to say. However, it is an informed bet based on historicals, and there's been many, many, many drafts where we can understand, what the mock drafts say, what the information you're getting, which you can add in as well. That's probably a little bit more proprietary for the teams. And then separately, how probable is it that I can trade up and just swap picks like the Kansas City Chiefs did last year and end up getting him for substantially less cost? I think it's an interesting reframe that I haven't noticed, but have noticed in the past week.
So I think all the things that you said bring us to another layer of this conversation, which I think is the conversation. It's become obvious to me that this is a conversation that needs to happen, and that is the difference between mock drafts and big boards, and big boards that incorporate mock draft data,
Right.
which to me means it is not a big board and should not have the name big board on it. And this has become my entire personality for the last month because it's driving me crazy, because it feels like we're merging data that doesn't belong together because they're telling two different stories. If you're doing a mock draft, you're projecting what you think the team will do. If you're doing a big board, you're saying, this is who I think is the most talented in order that I think they are the most talented. They're two completely different conversations. And so this year, I think that the big boards that put the two together and call that a big board are especially confusing the conversation and leading to a very polarizing conversation with regards to Shedeur, that now what I'm starting to see is people are calling people who suggest that Shedeur shouldn't go in the top 5 or won't go in the top 5. Now you're a hater. Now it's not about evaluation. You're picking on him in a way that you don't other people. And I think it goes to the fact that there are so many sources out there that are putting these two numbers together. And so people can point to big boards that have Shedeur at 4, and there are not big boards. 90% of big boards don't have Shedeur anywhere near 4. It's big boards that actually include mock draft data, which again is two totally, totally different conversations. So for instance, the NFL mock draft database, which does merge big boards and mock drafts, tons of mock drafts, it puts them together. And now they have in their consensus big board Sanders at 4. The Athletic, which only looks at big boards, literally evaluation tools, best available rankings, they have him at number 32. And if you have the time and are interested in pulling up Dane Brugler's big board and Daniel Jeremiah's big board and go name by name of the people that you trust as draft sources, I know Mel Kiper's an outlier here, right? So I need to point that out. If you pull them up one at a time, you're going to find a lot more of those big boards that have Sanders in the 30s and maybe even in the early 40s. So to me, the consensus of his talent in relation to the rest of this class lands in like the 30s for the most part. It's not 4. And so we're having conversations that I think people are like misunderstanding what the evaluation is at this point. And certainly there are some people that look at him and say, great, yes, the conversation for him is need driven. It just is. That's a fact, because the majority of evaluators don't have him in their top 5 or their top 10 in terms of best available or close to it. So it's a weird conversation that we're having with regard to him, that as early as Combine, you and I had this conversation a lot. And listening to evaluators talk about him, I predicted he's going to go later than people are talking about right now, because people aren't talking about him from a talent standpoint as being in the same tier as Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, or even Cam Ward. And so in that sense, you're going to have a team. You might have a team that reaches, but there's a lot more evidence that I think in recent years that when there is not the talent that matches that opportunity, we've seen teams not reach. And I've heard Nate Tyson, Dane Brugler had a conversation about quarterbacks earlier this week on their podcast for Yahoo on Nate's podcast.
Excellent listen for those who haven't
really
listened.
Good. And Dane compared this class to the Kenny Pickett class, right? And then they also brought up the 2019 class, which was Kyler Murray, where Kyler Murray was number 1. And then there was a big gap to the rest of the group. I think that's what the evaluation actually is, if you talk to evaluators that are deep in the weeds of watching tape. And so I think that Sanders becomes a fascinating where is he going to go? And also a very volatile conversation piece for that reason. I think we're just misunderstanding the information being put in front of us as a whole.
Yeah. And I think this is why in this year in particular, and I talked about this on the Draft FM podcast with Fran Duffy, who for years was in the Eagles team media organization and now is with PHLY from the All City Network. And he does his big board both horizontally and vertically. And he institutes basically an objective, quote unquote, system of positional value, which is basically like his top quarterback range is, the Lamar Jackson or the Josh Allen contract realm. Now, it's really difficult to approximate that a player will be that good. You'd basically have to be the perfect prospect. So I think that the highest level he has for quarterbacks is like the $40 million APY range, which ends up being slightly above the Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold range. Like it's basically a quality starter. Now, the problem is most everyone has Ashton Genty as, a top 5 big board guy, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems as if he's going to go like either 6 or 12 to Daniel's comment about who does Dallas draft at 12. Maybe they go Genty at 12. The reality, though, is that like at maximum, he's like a $10 to $12 million player. That's 3x difference in positional value. So as a result, I was going through some of my research from last year when we were working a lot more on draft guides and things like that. On our draft tools. And I think what I came away with was the quarterback position if you're going to draft a quarterback at 1, you can expect that it's basically going to end up like Justin Fields' career has ended up, that he's going to end up making about $17 to $20 million APY, which is not great if you're thinking quarterbacks, but in terms of just the dollar value that has to go to the cash and cap is pretty high. Everyone else is like DJ Reed, Rob Havenstein, like a quality second tier starter. That's what you can expect based on all the historicals, not necessarily projecting any of these individual players. And I think that's why I am kind of on the opposite of you, Lindsay, and just say like you have to think a little bit of positional value even when you're making your big board, because it's not realistic to how you would draft. So like if you're just listing out the players, there has to be some strategy included. Now, I do think, as you said, at this point, there's such a wide dichotomy on what's going on with Shedeur Sanders that the median is not the average anymore. The median may be 9, 15, 25 to the Steelers or something like that, where the average, because so many people are either putting him at 2 or putting him at 3, 33, or second round or late first round, the average may end up being like 4, which I think it is now. And I think this particular year leans your way, where there is a massive dichotomy in some of these guys' mock draft positions versus where their actual big board position would be.
But and my argument is not that there's no value to the mock draft consensus. My point is that they are different stories. They're telling different stories. You cannot merge them. Mm-hmm. Or if you're going to merge them and you think that there's value to doing that, like let's merge all of the voices, what people think and what people evaluate, then just call it something different. Yep. Because to us, big boards mean best available. And so there are so many people out there saying, what are you talking about? He's the 4th best player available according to the consensus big board. That's not a big board. It's just not. And that it's getting to the point where it's infuriating me. And I don't know, because I just feel like this is something that's happening in every faction of our society right now, right? We're like, I feel like we're just having different conversations and we're arguing, but our conversations are totally different facts that we're agreeing to. And I think in this case, it's just clear to me that it's different facts. You can say consensus mock draft and now put them at 4. Right. And now we're having a conversation and comparing that to the big board. And now you're having the conversation that's like, okay, now you're having a smarter conversation about like, but the positional value pulls him up, should it pull him up this high?
Mhm.
And now that's the real conversation. Whereas
Yep.
when I try to have that conversation now, people are like, what are you talking about? You're such a hater. I'm not a hater. These are literally the facts. This is what the average evaluation of him is, not by me, by people who do this professionally and live their
Right.
whole lives to do this. So anyway, let's move on from that. But I do think actually, let's not move on from that. Let's move on from that facet of the conversation and then go to
Yeah.
like what you think actually happens, because then you've got the Giants at 3. So let's say Hunter
Mhm.
is 2. Let's say that report's accurate. Cam Ward's going 1, Hunter's going 2. Then we've got the Giants at 3, who could take Shedeur or could take Carter. In this scenario, Carter, who a lot of people have said is by far the best player in this class, whether you agree with that or not. I've heard that from a ton of people who are draft evaluators. Now, if he's available at 3, and you're also having a conversation about like, okay, we used assets to sign Russell Wilson. We used assets to sign Jameis Winston. They're not our quarterbacks of the future, but we could kind of come back and bite the apple next year, right? We have someone who could play the position now, and we have a backup who could play the position now. We're not going to the Super Bowl, but that being said, you could also bring somebody in. It's an opportunity cost conversation. Are you going to pull Shedeur Sanders up here because you need a quarterback? Now we've got 3, and who even is our quarterback if they're all kind of same, and you're missing out on Abdul Carter, or do you just go Abdul Carter and you try and get a quarterback later after him? Like, I just start seeing some opportunities for him to fall.
Mhm.
And so if the Giants don't take him, now then it becomes a really interesting, like, where does he go? And I think you could highlight 9 and New Orleans as a team, maybe. I think that there's a strong chance that he's available at 21 when Pittsburgh picks, and or he looks like he's going to be available when Pittsburgh picks. And so maybe a team moves up to get ahead of Pittsburgh, which is an obvious team that needs a quarterback. Where are you thinking for Shedeur if the top 2 are
Before
what
we
we think they
before we
are?
jump to that, I do just want to note that you're saying we should call it something else, and I set up some engineering for some of the stuff to like super nerdy software stuff. But the thing I did
Yes.
name it separately. I named it like consensus ranking. I didn't name it
Oh, I
consensus
like that.
board and stuff like that. Yeah. So
There you go.
I'm actually on the same wavelength. So we're coming to an agreement. But I think you bring up a fantastic point, which is like, at what point do people start thinking about needs? Because if you look at the Giants' profile from last year, they were actually had a pretty excellent front, whether it was Dexter Lawrence. They added and invested deeply into Brian Burns. Kevon Thibodeau finished his 3rd year. They're going to have to make a decision before, basically before the draft. Technically, I think the date's May 1 on his 5th-year option. But like, how does Abdul Carter fit into that? Does that solve their problems? What happens if Travis goes beforehand? Because it seems like the pick that they would want to make would want to be Travis. Do they perhaps trade up to 2 and then the Cleveland comes back to 3 and takes Abdul Carter if that's who they want to take? There's so many great questions like this, but it still comes back to the quarterback position. Like, these teams need quarterbacks. And we've talked about it before. Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, a lot of very highfalutin coaches have given up on those guys. Are you really going to bank your whole career on those 2 guys who have played for multiple teams at this point and have been given up on by some of the best franchises in the National Football League? I don't know. And so it's with the Giants in particular, and it's a very similar situation for the Browns, who just spent $40 million on Myles Garrett. How much is Abdul Carter going to help your team marginally? And it just seems to me that he won't help either of those teams a ton outside of like the super duper long-term 2 or 3 year elements. And so it's such a tough decision. The Saints are interesting because I think the Saints don't necessarily care about cap allocation or asset allocation in a way that some of the other teams do. We've seen them trade up to reach on guys. We've seen them trade up to grab guys who are falling. We've seen them stretch contracts out. We've seen them keep older guys, and then we've seen them try to go with youth movements. Like, they're kind of all over the place. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Saints draft Sanders. But other than that, you make a great point. I guess maybe the Raiders may still be in the market. It's tough to know, but it feels like it's a boom or bust situation altogether.
See, to me, and maybe I'm overvaluing this because I agree that, Russell and Jameis are not particularly exciting options. It's not like you went out and you brought in like a
Mhm.
really slam dunk quarterback that closes the door on drafting a quarterback. I think for me, part of it is that they brought in both of them. And so I don't
Right.
understand, if you are going to draft Sanders, why you would have spent the money on both of them, knowing that one of them will be QB3. And you're essentially gonna make him, like, inactive. Like, why? Why are you doing that? It doesn't make sense to me that you prioritize bringing in Jameis, who is probably one of the better backup options who's
Mhm.
available, and better backup options, period, right? Why you would do that if you know that you are maybe gonna draft Shedeur Sanders, and now you've created a situation where Shedeur Sanders, who is 32nd on the Athletics big board according to evaluators this year, if you agree with that assessment and those people, you're gonna bring in the 32nd best player in this year's draft, and you're gonna put him in a competition with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, and do you have anyone who's run away with that? Like, and is
Hi guys, I'm having some technical difficulties right now. I can't hear anything. So I may have to jump out for a second. I don't know if y'all can hear me or not, but I don't know what just happened.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, great. I can hear you now. We're back in. Um
All right, sorry
I
about that.
yeah,
I'm
if you want to tee
I
me
don't know
back, back
where
in.
you lost me.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just talking about Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and Shedeur Sanders, and how you see a scenario. Like, there is a scenario in those three existing on the same quarterback room where Shedeur Sanders doesn't get on the field right away. In which case, what's the scenario where he does get on the field? And then how does he help this coaching staff and GM? How does he help people save their jobs? And so if you have somebody who's probably going to win that competition in camp, then and you have a backup who you could put in if it just all falls apart,
Hmm.
then you need to focus on adding pieces that can make that person have
Right.
more success. And I just think putting a third quarterback in the room and putting one of those guys that you just spent money on the sideline as your
Yeah.
QB3 on game day, it just feels like a misuse of resource allocation. So
Yeah.
I think that they're signaling to us that they are not going to take Sanders at number 3. And maybe they go get him in the second or the third round. That's obviously different in terms of, now you're not creating a quarterback competition that's quite the same, right? If you draft a quarterback at 3 and he can't win a
Right.
competition in camp, then that's a big problem for everyone in terms of the visuals of the optics of it. If if you draft him in the second, or like use a later
Hmm.
pick on him, and then that's the case, then you just go, okay, this is our quarterback of the future. I still think that that guy potentially never sees the field. And that's one of the problems I have with like the Raiders, who also went
Yeah.
out of their way to bring in Geno,
Hmm.
knowing that there's a quarterback available in the draft that they could potentially get, not knowing that that Sanders would fall to them at 6. So I understand that there's that, but you just spent money on Geno to bring him in.
Right.
And you're going to do that and also put Sanders in the same position. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. And by the way, as far as the Saints are concerned, the Saints might draft a quarterback of the future. Um, but I think one of the parts of this story that goes under focused on is that Derek Carr actually played really well when he was on the field last year. And so from an advanced stat standpoint, Derek Carr's numbers last year, and I fully understand we have a really long sample size of Derek Carr, and we know that he's not going to turn into to Josh Allen or anything like that, but he played well enough last year that you can win with Derek Carr. Derek Carr could potentially not be your problem. So now let's put some pieces around you. And then when he has a void year in 2027, now let's circle back and get that quarterback. They just used a pick on Spencer Rattler last year to put on the bench. Jake Haener was a pick just a couple of years ago. Like, go in a different direction.
It's immensely interesting because it's almost like in the same year that the quarterbacks are not great, which is the exact opposite of last year, which is so fascinating. In the same year that the quarterbacks are not great, the at least high voltage guys who could help a quarterback be great are also not there. Like, you'd have to basically bet on, it seems like Will Campbell or Armand Mimbu, who is a late riser, is a late riser in this draft. There's not a ton of great wide receivers. Teteroa McMillan's really the one. Genty, like, I think Genty is more of a ceiling raiser than a floor raiser. And it's just so tricky because there's no way to improve the quarterback ecosystem in this draft at those premium picks in the way that there was even last year, where all the quarterbacks were available, where you could go get a Malik Neighbors or a Joe Alt or a Marvin Harrison Jr., which, didn't necessarily work out the way we thought it was, or even a Brock Bowers to a certain degree. Like, I think Brock Bowers is probably a step or two above even the tight ends this year, who are really well thought about. And that's it's almost a perfect storm of draft chaos, really, in that you can't really improve your quarterback ecosystem, and you can't actually improve your quarterback situation according to the general consensus at the same time. But those are the most important things to do in the draft. And
not at those positions, not in the first round, not at the top of the first round.
Exactly.
But you can get a running back who can improve their ecosystem. Later, you can grab a wide receiver that you think could be a good number 2 or a 3 that makes the offense just that more cohesive. You can get that person a little bit later. And maybe in the first round, if you're the Giants, you go get somebody that people are describing as more of a slam dunk and maybe the closest thing to a slam dunk in this draft. And now you have, as the general manager, somebody who could say, like, hey, I drafted the next Michael Parsons. Like, are you upset about that? Like, whether or not this actually leads to that many more wins, I made our team better by grabbing clearly the best available at this point. And then I can get that running back and tight end positions where there's depth. I can get these guys later, and I can build up the assets around the quarterback that I've already committed to in Russell Wilson. I just think that if you reach for a quarterback that is not a consensus top 5, top 10 guy, if you reach for that guy in this draft and it doesn't work out, now not only have you lost your job, but the franchise is like set way back because you didn't use that pick on someone else who you absolutely could have plugged in and could have been a potential all-pro guy. Like, you're passing up on the all-pro possible for a possibly good enough quarterback. And I just think that that's a bet that you can't make. I think you can make it potentially if you go a little bit further and now that guy isn't available. So now you're doing the assessment that you're talking about. If you're sitting at 9, for instance, and you're like, well, I need a running back. And this isn't the case for the Saints, but like, if you're like, I need a running back, I need a tight end, like maybe now I go get the quarterback instead because the good players from a positional value standpoint don't check that box. I don't know. I think this is such a fascinating draft for so many reasons because of the way that the different position groups actually, the way they shake out.
Yeah. I think the geek way to say this, or the draft curve researcher way to say this, is we all talk about the Jimmy Johnson curve, for example, and we all know that it's kind of outdated. And I was running into a lot of problems last year because there were so many premium players that were scrunched up at the top that it actually did start resembling the Jimmy Johnson curve, because you wanted to be number 1 to get Caleb Williams. You wanted to be number 2 to get Jaden Daniels. We wanted to be number 3 to get Drake May. You wanted to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to get some of these excellent wide receivers, tackles, second tier quarterbacks. Like you had to be in the top 12 of the draft last year. That was the kind of consensus at the time, or you were going to miss out on the value, which was these immensely premium players. This year is the exact opposite. This is like the analytics geek flat curve year where if you recall before the combine, we were even considering Cam Ward, or the consensus was that it's shifted a little bit now, but the consensus was that Cam Ward was probably not as high up as JJ McCarthy and would have been drafted after JJ McCarthy last year. And so if we consider that consensus prior to the combine or prior to everyone coming together, at least and swapping notes, it's very interesting to consider that maybe all these teams should trade back into the middle, because maybe we did just kind of get too caught up in the loop, even though it does seem like Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are the blue chip guys. And so this feels like the ultimate flat curve draft in a way that we maybe haven't seen since the Kenny Pickett draft.
Well, and also to that point, you've got Abdul Carter, and then the rest of the edges, like look at different big boards. I mean, my guess is that, jump into a team front office. If you had the ability to look at their big boards, their rankings of that next group of edge guys would be totally different. Same with wide receiver. And honestly, wide receiver could even be at the top, because I've seen a lot of Matthew Golden now at wide receiver 1. And so it could very much be a beauty in the eye of the beholder. And, Daniel was asking who Dallas drafts at 12. Matt Harmon had an interesting conversation about maybe Matthew Golden with the Cowboys, so we don't even 100% know the order of the wide receivers. I mean, running back Ashton Genty, and then I don't know. So that part, like now we're throwing that into the mix too. It's not just a straight, like, let's just check off these boxes in order of best available. We don't know what they think is best available. We don't know what order they're putting these guys in. It's less obvious this year at so many positions. I think it's fascinating. Hidden needs. Let's go through some of these guys. Was there anything else that you think we needed to touch on from a news standpoint from the last week?
So I think the kind of cherry on top of the commentary that we've been doing is it appears we don't know who quarterback 3 is, because apparently the NFL, the National Football League proper, the league office up here on Park Avenue, thinks that Jalen Milroe is getting drafted in the first round, and nobody else thought that.
I'm glad you brought that up. That absolutely got my attention. The fact that he was invited to the draft. Like, we try to avoid having someone sitting in the green room for longer than we want them to sit in the green room. You do not want somebody sitting there for all 32 picks and then camera on them. They have to make a decision whether or not they're going to come back on day 2. And it happens sometimes that they're like, oh, I'm not going to come back. I'm going to fly home and be with my family. Like, that's an awkward situation for everybody. And so what information are they operating with that they think that Jalen Milroe should be live and in person sitting behind the scenes in the green room?
Yeah. And I've seen minimal drafts have even Jackson Dart, prior to 9, maybe. Like if you were doing a mock draft, you are like presenting a hot take. If you have Jackson Dart, who is the current consensus QB3 in the first round, even, or at least in the early selections of the first round, the ones that think are certified first rounders, I haven't seen any that have Jalen Milroe anywhere near the top. And so it brings about a question of, number one, do we just have the entirety of 2 through 4 or 5, if you want to include Tyler Shuck, which Mel Kiper Jr. clearly thinks might be going 33.
I think a lot of people do.
Man,
I've seen. I mean,
there's a lot of college ball to watch of that guy. The film is out there, guys.
Do you not like the film? Because I will say this, okay? And I'm not a college person, so I'm not an evaluator. I'm trying to read the room, right? That's where my draft analysis is coming from. You put Tyler's name into the search engine on Twitter and look at the people who are talking about him. Like, there is a consistent pattern now of very smart NFL people, very smart football people that are finding things that they very much like about Tyler Shuck. And so there's a pattern there, and he's older. And I think, as Mina Kimes called him, a geriatric. Like, now you're drafting a geriatric quarterback. That is clearly potentially a problem. The note that he's older than Trevor Lawrence is like the best note in this year's draft. Like,
Yeah.
what? But I think that he's an interesting wild card in that group of quarterbacks. But that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of, like, we have no idea who values who after a certain point. Like, we're assuming it's Cam Ward and then Shador and then who knows. But we don't know.
It's so fascinating to me in a way that I don't even think I've seen before, in which the people who closely watch college ball for the purposes of college ball do not like Tyler Shuck. The people who like pro ball for the purposes of watching pro ball also do not like Tyler Shuck. The people who watch college ball for the purposes of projecting to pro ball do like Tyler Shuck, despite the fact that typically they hate people that are 26 years old in their rookie year. Maybe Brandon Whedon is the only one that I can think of that snuck into the first round and was somewhat similar. I think he was 27. Like, let's go through some of the key points on our draft guide. You know, he has 4 items that are very key: in intermediate accuracy, deep accuracy. That shows up on his completion percentage over expected map. He has 2 greens, 20 plus and out. I think the thing that people love is the pressure to sack ratio. That's a sticky stat that people have been told over and over again goes to the next level. And I think when we're looking at a guy like Bo Nix, for example, who avoided sacks and was able to run an offense behind an excellent offensive line, I think people maybe are thinking that Tyler Shuck could be that type of guy. The thing that I worry about is, though, very, very low scramble rate. And that was kind of the thing that made Bo Nix excellent, was he could kind of vamp. He could kind of improvise. And I just think this is going to be a career backup at best. Now, what do I know about quarterbacks? Probably not a lot. I probably know more about the process of the draft and the decision-making processes and the thoughts and the values than any given one player. But once again, like, this fellow was part of my recruiting class. I've been in the workforce for going on 4 years.
Hello. It is the age questions for him are just fascinating. By the way, if anybody is watching this on YouTube or Twitter right now, you can get a look at some of the draft guide and what it looks like, how it lays out, and I think it's pretty cool. I think that our engineers did a really good job. The artwork looks awesome. The colors are really user-friendly for people like myself that sort of need things to be pretty clear. As we've established, I can't multiply fractions, so I need colors when I'm looking at numbers. Okay, let's do some hidden needs, Sam.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about let's make some predictions that are a little bit less obvious with regards to some draft picks that might happen. And I know that you've been looking at some teams, and obviously for every team, we're talking about the needs and the guys that they're most likely to draft probably in the first round. Let's go beyond that. Like, what would surprise us, or what wouldn't surprise us, but might be surprising in terms of the bigger picture?
So the reason why I wanted to hit this is because all the discussions about how we have no idea of what's going to happen, I was trying to figure out what one of 2 things would be. Who would be the bracket buster or the pick buster, where like all things start going down the tube of what we predicted, just because we didn't see something prior to that could have been foreseen. The second item is, who would be the team that someone trades up for a player and the day after it comes out that XYZ team was interested in that player, and we're like, XYZ team was interested in that player. So let's start off with my first one, which I think is kind of the most in plain sight, though it wouldn't necessarily align with what the coaches and the general managers have said publicly. And that is the Carolina Panthers have a need at tackle. And it wouldn't, if you looked at their depth chart, you wouldn't think so. Ike Ekwonu and Taylor Moton were pretty good last year. They were part of an ascendant offensive line that led to a running back in Chuba Hubbard having a pretty good year and a late ascension from Bryce Young. That is the reason why they are not looking for a quarterback right now. That being said, they have to make a fifth-year decision within the next month on Ike Ekwonu, and I'd be shocked if they go ahead and extend the fifth-year option. Secondarily, Taylor Moton will be a free agent next year. There will be tackles in the range of their pick available. I would expect Mimbu or Campbell or both will be there. I would not be shocked if that throws everything into haywire if they go for a tackle. That's kind of the first one that I'm eyeing.
You're saying with the first pick, like don't go edge linebacker there, which everyone thinks is going to happen.
I wouldn't be shocked if the draft plays out in a way where, let's say they have a blue chip grade on Will Campbell because he's been immensely productive, and they don't necessarily on a Jalen Walker, who's a little bit more of a project, or a Jahad Campbell or a Michael Williams or a James Pierce. I would not be shocked if they go with the best available on their board, and that would probably be a tackle at that position, in my view of how the draft could fall. What do you think?
I mean, yes, that could happen. I think it's unlikely to happen simply because their defense was so terrible.
Yep.
And they have established a pattern of fixing things in chunks. Like last year, it was putting Bryce Young in a better environment and, problems semi-solved by the end of the season. Now I feel like we kind of have some stuff that we can work with there. Can certainly get better on offense, 100%, but it feels like we've got something that we can work with. The defense was awful. I mean, awful, 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 right? Like you need the pass rush. You need a higher pressure rate. You need to keep the points down and the yards down, last in the league. And I just think it's such a dramatic need that they need there, that if there is somebody on the board in that spot that they think can help dramatically in those areas, I think they have to check that box.
So. Yeah, I tend to agree, given that the way the consensus big boards have operated and the way the mock drafts have operated, there will be those guys. I just think if there is a clear tier difference, and I could see in particular why you would have Will Campbell as a blue chip guy, especially if you listen to our Duke Manyweather discussion and you're like, oh no, this dude's a tackle, and this dude's one of the best tackles I've ever seen. Yeah. Like if you have that approach coming from his trainer, looking at his production, the analytics of it all, which you can go check out. He's excellent. Multiple badges for him, I believe, on our draft guide. I think that's one that could shock it. And don't forget, last year both of the Panthers' first selections were shocking. They went with Xavier Legette in the first round, then they went with Jonathan Brooks in the second round. No one expected them to do either of those things. So put a cap on that one. I just wouldn't be shocked if the Panthers, again, this is more of a take, but I'm trying to overanalyze.
It's a logical take. It's a logical take. There's logic behind it. And so let's, shine a light on it as a possible move for sure. What else?
So the second one is a little bit more clear. However, given some of the high-powered defensive tackles, and there could be a defensive tackle run early or earlier than expected, just depending on Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, some of these guys. I think there could be hot teapot for kind of before the Chiefs pick. I wouldn't be shocked if they end up trading up a la their Xavier Worthy style last year in order to get a defensive tackle. They lost Tershawn Wharton, and I think that is something that people didn't realize how big of a role he played for that Chiefs team last year. I think that one is another one which is a little safer. They may be able to just wait and end up getting a defensive tackle, but I think if they want a first-round quality defensive tackle, which is now of recent years a premium position, that is a hidden need for them, and that could throw kind of the middle of the round calculus in and out of whack if they decide that they need to go up and get one of these defensive tackles like Kenneth Grant, for example.
What do you think about the chances, not in the first necessarily? What do you think the likelihood is that they draft a tight end?
Oh, man. I don't know. Now we're
I
talking
mean,
about hidden needs because I didn't even think about that one.
but is it hidden? I mean, we're talking about Kelsey retiring on a yearly basis,
That's a
and they
that's a
use
great
tight
point.
end so much in their offense. And if there is an offense that I can
Ooh.
absolutely see just pivoting and creating a completely different offense to match the skill set available to them, like, now we're not going 12 personnel because we don't have Kelsey. It's 100% Andy Reid's Kansas City Chiefs. But knowing that he's on a year-to-year basis, we're having this conversation. He is not for long. You've got Noah Gray, but does he step into that role? This is a good tight end class. I'm not necessarily saying in the first round, though maybe in the first round. Maybe they check that box and bring somebody else in that they could put in 12 personnel situations immediately with Kelsey and could be the heir apparent, sort of like Trey McBride style. Go get that guy. And then once he is gone, a la Zach Ertz, then plug him in. And now you've got a top of market guy.
I feel like my third eye has just been open, Lindsay. I did not even consider this. And if Colson Loveland makes it past the Chargers and maybe the Broncos as well, if they want to double down on the tight end position, I think this is something that, like, hidden need maximum. I think this is something that could definitely happen.
And they're definitely a team that's looking at, I mean, like the kinds of things that you're pointing out, which is, hey, this guy is a free agent next year. And so let's put ourselves in a position where we don't have to keep him and can set ourselves up for the future. I think the Chiefs are that team. We're talking about, yours have been very first round driven. I found a hidden need that I think would surprise some people to a degree about, like, but I don't think it's a first round pick, and that's the Dolphins potentially going running back, because I think, well, on paper they sort of look relatively set up, like Achane, and then they have Jalen Warren, who they went out and got last year. Was it last year? God, it feels like everything feels so long ago to me now. But I think that they had so many injuries at that position last year, and their entire offense falls apart if they don't have that. I mean, clearly it falls apart if they don't have two. But also, like, if you don't have that running back that you can use in the ways that that offense needs that running back to the job that they need that person to do, and the boxes they need that person to check, if you have any injury, it just throws the whole thing out of whack. And so I think that at some point in this draft, they go running back again. And so then that begs the question, if they do, is it the same type of running back? Are you still looking for a speed guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield, because you're looking for somebody that you could plug in who could do exactly what Achane does, in the manner that we've become accustomed to Achane doing it? Or do you need like a change of pace type of guy and kind of go like build it out a little bit more like the Lions, where you sort of have one of each?
It's a fantastic point, especially in a draft where the curve may be flat on the tailbacks after Genty and maybe, if you want to include Marion Hampton, but the curve is substantially over other positions all the way through the draft. There's a lot of excellent running backs. I was skeptical of this for a little bit, but going through this draft guide process, it's clear there's a bunch of guys who can fit a bunch of needs. And so, like a guy who is way down the consensus big board, Brashard Smith, we're going to have Quinn on Draft FM, Quinn McLean, a data scientist, with us here at SumerSports, talk about him. Here's a 4.3 guy who had 12% of team target share, an excellent explosive run rate, excellent yards after contact in his time with Southern Methodist, who made the jump to a power conference and had an excellent year in the ACC. That's perhaps a guy that I think would be really interesting for them. Bashal Tootin, if they're just going to go with pure speed, is a burner from Virginia Tech. I think there's a lot of guys in that range all throughout the draft who they may be interested in.
All right. That one's an interesting one. Anyone else that you want to drop here? Give us another hidden need that you've got for us, Sammy.
All right. I'm looking at the clock. I'm telling Stopsky and DJ to turn on the short form camera, because this is going back in the Sam Brookhouse hot sauce hot takes. I'm bringing it back, if only for
Are you calling your clip right now?
I'm calling for the clip. We got a minute 08. We got an hour 08:50. I'm wondering if the 49ers aren't interested in a quarterback. Here's my reasons why. And this was led on by our friends, Dane and Nate Tice, Dane Brugler and Nate Tice, one of The Athletic, one of Yahoo Sports, of them discussing Shador Sanders's, outline. And moreover, I think there are some quarterbacks who fit this need, but a timing quarterback, a quarterback who needs to be put in an offense that kind of has it all laid out for him, but he can do it all, has polish, and can make perimeter throws. There's multiple guys. We mentioned Tyler Shuck. He's one of those guys. Will Howard's another one of those guys. I'm wondering if they are not in the quarterback market because I have not heard a single peep about a Brock Purdy extension. It seems like a forgotten thing for a guy who was supposed to be paid $60 million this offseason, Lindsay.
So how much of a priority would they make that, though, in terms of their draft, considering the other needs that they have? Trying to figure out, like, where they could check that box as a team, obviously, that, very famously, I don't know if you've heard, was able to get a starting quarterback out of the Mr. Irrelevant pick. um, can they go get a quarterback later that kind of checks their specific boxes, or do they go in that direction ahead of maybe going and getting, somebody to put on the line with Nick Bosa? They have a pretty strong need on the interior on the defensive line. Jordan Elliott and Evan Anderson are their current defensive tackles. You could draft it also somewhat hidden need and heir apparent to Trent Williams and plan for the future at that position, which is probably coming sooner rather than later. How do you balance all of this in terms of where in the draft to check these boxes?
That's the thing. I'm not sure. We've seen Shanahan undervalue the offensive line before and get away with it practically. Like, still have an excellent offense despite not investing heavily outside of Trent Williams in the offensive line. I think the defense is a little stickier, but where they currently sit, they can add an edge rusher. They can maybe they end up being in play for like a Will Johnson or something like that at the cornerback position, the cornerback from Michigan. But it's like so hazy for them. And I really haven't felt this way since it was like, oh, wait, did they just trade up to 3 to draft Trey Lance or Mac Jones? And, Stopsky's comp for Shador Sanders, Mac Jones. And it's just like the haziness around what they may do is what's leading me to this, because I feel like the Purdy thing was a foregone conclusion in the middle of last year. He played pretty excellently according to the measures, but we've seen them move off of guys despite excellent EPA per play and trust their system, and we've seen it work out. And I'm wondering if, especially given they kind of axed a lot of people, Deebo Samuel, one of them, Aaron Banks, another one, on offense and on the defensive side of the ball, if they're not thinking they're more in rebuild mode than even the win totals, which we talked about last week, think they are.
It would be pretty.
I would be floored. But
I mean, kind of. It just feels like a very ballsy move for a team that hasn't actually proven to be very good at evaluating quarterbacks. Like this Purdy, even though he turned out to be good enough, certainly, separate conversation about how good he actually is, not having that here. But like, they didn't evaluate that. They didn't nail that. They got lucky with that. They just took a quarterback and he turned out to be fine once given the opportunity. When evaluating the quarterback in that move up to 3, they just whiffed so hardcore. So I feel like if you have something that works and you're going to have like a, if it's not broke, don't fix it type of approach that a lot of people would have. If you're like, nah, I'm going to blow this up, I would want to make sure I was real good at assessing who that next person was going to be.
Yeah. And again, this is an out there take. But it is something when you hear guys like Nate Tice and Dane Brugler, who I really trust to do excellent work, say things like, oh, I think my comp for Shador Sanders would be Brock Purdy. And I think he could succeed in an offense like Brock Purdy. And then you look at what they've done in the past, and, they did trade up for Trey Lance. They did go ahead and draft Brock Purdy after, trading up for Trey Lance. They did draft Ricky Pearsall in the first round, 2 rounds above his EDP. And if you want to look at the middle rounds, they drafted Isaac Guerendo, who was expected to be an undrafted free agent, like 3rd or 4th round, if I remember correctly. So this is, number one, a team that does shocking things in the draft. And like you said, has a different evaluation process than everyone else. And number 2,
sorry,
who seems to undervalue certain positions, who seems to have a different approach to other positions, who seems to think they can replace quarterbacks seemingly at will. It's really interesting.
Shador's comp being Brock Purdy, does that beg a separate question to add context to the Shador at 3 conversation? Because if you're sitting there at 3, like, people are so torn about Purdy.
Yep.
As it is. And so if the comp is Purdy, and I realize that other comps are like Mac Jones and like people that just totally didn't work out. And a lot of the comps are just stylistic. And so it's hard to say like he is going to be him in an offense. Like wherever you think Brock Purdy ranks, that's where Shador Sanders has the potential to rank. But we're having a conversation about potentially whether or not Brock Purdy is somebody that is worth paying. Do you want to go specifically out of your way to add that? Is that in and of itself a statement about Shador? Because it's certainly good enough. And if you could take a good enough quarterback and put them on the Giants right now, they would be like, yay, nailed it. But I just wonder if that's what you're actually looking to get at 3.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And I think this would be a great question as y'all talk about quarterbacks on Friday on the SiriusXM show, which you can catch at 7 p.m. Eastern time on SiriusXM 88 NFL radio on Fridays, again, 7 p.m. Because Thomas has like set forth the rubric to grade quarterbacks, for example. And I'm wondering that there's different incentives for scouts and analysts like me. Scouts want to nail the guys who do good, and they want to say, hey, this guy's going to be an excellent player. It doesn't make sense for a scout to be like, oh, yeah, he's going to be okay, but that's better than everyone else, right? A scout wants to project to the highest that a player can potentially achieve. An analyst wants to say, pick one, Justin Fields is probably the average you can do, which like nobody wants to hear. And so the analyst in me is like, yeah, if you can get Brock Purdy at pick 3, that's immensely better than what the average is. You really knock that pick out of the park. But the scout in me, or the person who understands how scouting works and who understands the incentives behind drafting and the way you want to lead an organization and continually trying to get better, I don't know if it doesn't seem that good of an outcome really. And that's a guy who, based on his profile, went in the 7th round, the last pick of the draft. And based on his profile now in a redraft, I don't know if he ends up being a super highly picked player. And so it's really an interesting conversation that blends the analytics and kind of the traditional way, and even like the political, philosophical, psychological ways that you want to build a team and build a scouting organization or build a drafting organization in general with analytics. So it's a really interesting question that you bring up, Lindsay.
Going back to the Jalen Milroe, because you brought up the Jets. Did you bring up the Jets or did you bring up Jalen Milroe? Anyway, either way, my brain was like, I wanted to talk about that. We talked about him being invited to the draft and that being semi-confusing. When I was going through team needs today and looking at kind of depth charts to prepare for this conversation, I was looking at the Jets, and I know that a lot of people are way ahead of this conversation in that regard. But the fact that they went out and they got Justin Fields, and then they also have Tyrod Taylor. So they've got a backup who stylistically can do the same thing. So if Justin Fields kind of goes out, like they're coming up with an offense, which I think is smart, that it is going to be very specific to skill sets, right? Like they don't have a backup that looks nothing like Justin Fields and can't do the same things. Does that maybe point us to, if they draft somebody, if he is still available in a later round, not the first, does that point us to Jalen Milroe being a specifically interesting person for the Jets? Or would you not? Because I also understand not drafting because you happen to have Justin Fields as your best available option. Now you're going to plan your entire future offense based on the offense that you kind of had to create just based on what was available to you right now. I understand that thought process too, but does it make sense to maybe bring in or did they do this because they have their eye on a Jalen Milroe and think like, maybe all of this could work in concert with one another?
It's an excellent point. And the formula that you just laid out reminds me a lot of what the Broncos did last year, which is add a young player who maybe hasn't achieved a ton, but has played snaps. Zach Wilson for the Broncos, Justin Fields for the Jets. Keep your backup who you trust Jarrett Stidham for the Broncos, Tyrod Taylor for the Jets, and then draft a quarterback in the middle of the round, which in this case could be a Jalen Milroe or someone of that ilk, and was Bo Nix last year. So the formula is out there. The reason I love this take, Lindsay, is because I haven't gotten to talk about this a lot. I talked about it a lot during the season where we actually get to watch people, run their quarterbacks. But I think your floor is just pushed so far up if you have running quarterbacks in the modern NFL game. And it makes a lot of sense for a group that has been on teams that have been kind of in the cutting edge, or at least have put together really outstanding seasons despite adversity, despite personnel issues in Aaron Glenn from the Lions and Muji from the Broncos, to take an approach like that. And as someone who loves quarterback designed runs and understands the power that those can have in a season, I think it's an excellent move. Now, I wonder if they don't address that round one. I think they in particular are probably more positioned to address it round 2 or 3, or maybe even 4 or 5. But I do want to note someone who took a similar approach to this last year was the Steelers, who I think are probably the one that the NFL has circled of, we're going to invite Jalen Milroe because I think the Steelers might draft him, because he fits perfectly into that kind of high variance style of play. Get the ball out deep to receivers. He put it out there for Ryan Williams last year. He's put it out there for excellent Alabama wide receivers before. And then the kind of running game that they tried to have with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson as well. The Steelers are more the one that I have slated for Jalen Milroe, but I could see why the Jets could put together a formula in order to get him in the building.
Okay, looking at our draft guide here for Jalen Milroe, his completion percentage over expected by zone, we've got, up the middle, I guess it's great, right? So his ADOT is 10.05, which is average in terms of, there are guys with higher ADOTs. But when you look at the completion percentage over expected, I'm just looking deep ball, because it looks like they have wide receivers who could do other things, but it feels like DK and George Pickens and Calvin Austin, like they're primarily deep ball threats. And so you look at those two red squares at 10 plus and 20 plus on the left-hand side, minus 25.2% and minus 33.8%. And are those concerning for you if you're looking at specifically adding him to this offense?
I think there's a couple points in Milroe's profile. This is a guy who I have watched a lot of and have analyzed deeply, because he was my Heisman pick at the beginning of the year, and he caught fire against two of the best teams in the nation, Georgia and LSU, last year. I think the same question that we have to apply to Will Howard has to apply to Milroe this year. Is, do those two orange spots on the right side, is that just a Ryan Williams stat, where Ryan Williams, the young wide receiver, freshman wide receiver, not even 18 for most of the year, was just way more elite than even guys like Malachi Starks, for example, who is a very highly talented draft pick at the safety position this year and could just make plays that other people couldn't. And he just trusted him with the go ball and was just throwing it up on the right side. So I think that's question one. Question two is, how much did the shift from the Nick Saban style offense to the Kalen DeBoer style offense really mess with whatever he was doing? Because there was a lot of stats that
clearly.
Yeah, there was a lot of stats that indicated the entirety of his game shifted, which it is unfortunately for him, the Kalen DeBoer offense has put two straight quarterbacks in the NFL. But maybe those weren't his strengths, and maybe it's someone like Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, or Tanner Angstrad over at the Jets could put him in a better position. I think that's question two. And number three is, he's electric running the ball. Yeah. How much of that is going to transfer to the National Football League? If you can get 75% of that rushing and then improve him, bring him along as Sean Payton did Bo Nix year 1, 2, and 3, we have a guy. And I think that's why people are so interested in Jalen Milroe, and why, you see reports that say oh, he's been QB3 among the league circles the entire time, which seems shocking to everyone else.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm falling back into this. This is upsetting.
Does Jalen Milroe to the Steelers make sense, also considering that this is the same team that went away from Justin Fields last year? Like, this is a team where Justin Fields was fine-ish, right? Like, I mean, he wasn't terrible, certainly when they took him off the field and they went to Russell Wilson. And from a skill set standpoint, that would seem to indicate that they would prefer for somebody who had strengths that were different than what Justin Fields' strengths are. And so how different are the things that make Jalen Milroe special than the things that make Justin Fields special?
It's a excellent point. And especially given they went ahead and added Mason Rudolph, who was in the building. So tough to know. Does deepen that question. But I think the fact that maybe they, number one, they tried to go to it last year as an experiment per se, is interesting. And then secondarily, I think they just didn't want to pay those two guys, which Russell Wilson, I would have advised that they tried to keep Russell Wilson if you would have asked
For
me.
this
And I don't know if for this season, I don't know if you would agree. But
yes. And I'm not a huge fan. It's a very circumstantial set of advice.
Yeah. And so I'd lean more that this is a cheaper option that they can trot out there, especially given their secondary option right now is Mason Rudolph. And this is the Steelers. They're going to try to win. Like, this isn't a tank year for the Steelers, I don't think. Or unless I'm shocked. And unless Omar Khan had a multi-year plan to see what the guys did and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think they're going to try to do what's best to win. And I think maybe they thought that was the direction last year. They got a taste of it. They made the playoffs, and now they want to shoot for the high ceiling with a guy like Milroe.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that they're ever fully rebuilding. They're going to be in a position at some point, potentially. They're much more likely to go down the same road that the Saints went down, where they're going to be like, but we're so close. And so I can't really rip this Band-Aid off and just go for the full rebuild. I think they're going to hover there for a while, unless they fix it, unless they just find the answer and it puts them over the top and they're back where we expect them to be.
Yeah.
All right. Lots of interesting stuff here. Sam Bruckhouse, again, want to reiterate, go check out the draft guide. We've shown you some of the parts of it that I think are really, really cool. Hopefully you've seen enough that you're intrigued and want to go check it out. It is free. FREE. At some point, after you've looked at enough pages, it might ask you just to set up an account with Sumer to continue looking at the draft guide. I can't reiterate enough. That will also still be free. So just plop your email in there. We're not going to spam you or anything like that. But so go check it out. We'd love to hear your feedback also about it. I'd love to hear, which things you guys like the best, and maybe what you think we should work on for future draft guides. What are you not seeing out there in the market that you think would be interesting for us to try and take a crack at next? And Sam, as you pointed out, I, not you, will be with Thomas Dimitrov on Friday on the SiriusXM Draft Show. We'll be taking a look at quarterbacks and cornerbacks and safeties. We're looking at DBs and quarterbacks this week on the show. So hope that you'll join us there. Channel 88, SiriusXM NFL. That is at 7 Eastern. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. For Sam Bruckhouse, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. This has been the SumerSports Show.